Hi, I'm Delano with Digital Tutors, an Autodesk authorized publisher, and I'd like to welcome you to Introduction to Character Rigging in Maya. The purpose of this course is to help you gain a solid foundation in the character rigging process so that you can rig your own characters with confidence. We'll get started by first learning how to create a skeleton that is clean and that will deform well. We'll then bind our character to our skeleton and cover some time-saving weight painting techniques. After that, we'll set up controls that are user-friendly. Along the way, we'll also learn how to adjust a control object's rotate order to help prevent gimbal lock interpolations. We'll learn how to export skin weights using melt, as well as how to mirror blend shapes and use blend shape targets to correct deformations. By the end of the set of tutorials, you'll have the understanding needed to rig your own characters. So let's say we get started. In this lesson, we'll get started on our skeleton. Now, before we begin, I'd like to point out that the rig that we'll create in this introductory course is still going to be an animator-friendly one, so we can still work with this rig for animation. So we'll have a lot of fun here as we go ahead and build something that will eventually bring this character to life. So super exciting stuff. Now, another thing I'd like to point out to you is that we want to keep our scenes as clean and organized as possible, so that's going to be one of our key points throughout this entire course. And it goes from little things like display layers, so we can eventually go in and hide our creature, but to get to the rigging components we'll add, or how we organize all of our nodes with, let's say, groups. So you can see here, if we were to go to our perspective and outliner view, you can see we have this main group that our creature is stored within. If we were to expand that, you can see we have these subgroups that hold different parts of the creature's body. We'll be creating more groups just so you can get the process down for keeping things organized. It's very important, especially when we start to hand off our files to other artists so they can quickly go in and find what they need. And we'll also want to make sure that we use solid naming conventions, so again, it's very clear to anyone using the file as to what the object is they need to work with and where to find certain things. Alright, so with that said, getting in and creating a display layer is really straightforward. It's just a matter of grabbing all of the objects that you'd like to add to the display layer, and then we can use this last choice underneath our display tab. So we want to create a new layer and assign selected objects, and there's our layer. Alright, great, and then we can template the creature. We can go ahead and set it to reference, which will allow us to see the creature in shaded mode, but take a look, we cannot select the mesh. So this is ideal for animation. When we're finally finished with our character, we probably want to make sure the mesh is set to reference. If you like to rename your layer, it's just a matter of double clicking on the layer, and you can go in and name this anything you'd like. Let's say geometry. So now when we go ahead and choose save, that name has been saved. And take a look, if I were to double click on this again, you could also change the color of the items tied to your layer, all from here. Alright, well, I'm going to go ahead and cancel this out. I'll also go ahead and remove this layer. I'll simply go ahead and right click and choose delete. We need to add our character back to the model layer, so I'll just go ahead and highlight all of our pieces, and then we'll go ahead and right click and choose add selected objects. Alright, wonderful. So we're ready to get started on our skeleton now. To access our join tools, we can start building out our bone objects. We'd head over to our animation module. We can do that a few ways. We can go to our module drop down, or we can press F2. Great. So from here we'd go to skeleton, join tool, options. I'll reset the settings so yours match mine. And then we can go ahead and close this out. Okay, so from here, let's say we go ahead and grab our 4-panel view so that we can go ahead and take a look at the side view. We're starting with the legs, and it's ideal to start from a side view or the view that would show us a slight bend in the knee, because when we eventually add inverse kinematics so that we can simulate natural leg movements, Maya's going to want to know what direction we'd like the knee to bend in. So if we create a straight chain, Maya's going to get confused and it's going to guess what our preferred angle should be. And because of that, you might get the wrong direction, so we just want to be really careful about that. So we'll go ahead and start from our side view here. We'll also make sure we template our model. We're going to create a slight bend in our chain so that we can let Maya know what direction we'd like the knee to bend in. So let's go ahead and get started with this. That's going to be the thigh. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We'll go ahead and put this in place once we've managed to create this initial chain. And then we'll create a slight bend for the knee. And then the ankle. Go ahead and create a joint for that. Let's go ahead and click again to create a foot bone, which is very important because when we eventually go back and create a foot roll system, we need this bone here. And then to finish this chain, I'm going to create a toe joint. Alright, great. Now we are going to change this just slightly, but I just wanted to kind of show you the process for creating this chain. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at this in the perspective view. You can see it's right there in the center because we drew the chain from an orthographic view. Why did we do that instead of just drawing it from the perspective view? Well, let me go ahead and show you why. If we were to grab that same joint tool, we can either click on that on our toolbar or press the Y key to get to that same tool from the toolbar, of course. Now, if we were to go ahead and start drawing our chain out, it might look like it's projected towards the camera, right? Well, if we were to start orbiting, you can see that that is not the case. We've actually created a 7. Pretty neat, but it's not needed. Alright, so let's go ahead and hit enter to finish this chain, and we'll now go ahead and remove it. So that's why you probably want to start your chain from an orthographic view so you know exactly where it's going to end up. And there are some exceptions, but to be on the safe side, it's best to work with an orthographic view. Alright, so watch this. We can now go ahead and take our chain here. We can start moving it over. Now, as of right now, I have my move tool set to object mode. If we were to go ahead and start translating this in the z-axis, well, you can see that it's not giving us an accurate value because it says that we're moving in the x-axis. So how do we know what axis we're moving in for sure? Well, here's what we can do. We can hold down the W key and the left mouse button to get to our move tool settings. This is just a fast way of doing that. Another way is to double click on your tool on the toolbar. From there, you can go ahead and change your settings from here. But what we want to do is choose local. Now, if we were to hold down the W key and the left mouse button to get to local, you can see it's not a part of this first set. In this context menu, we'd want to go ahead and choose axis and then local. And then if we want to get back, we just need to go ahead and mouse over that dot here, you see. Alright, great, but now that it's set to local, now when we start to move in the x-axis, that's the actual axis we're tweaking. As you can see, that's the value that's updating. So we're going to translate this over. Now we need to rotate this in place, but we don't want to do that using our rotate gizmo. We don't want to use this manipulator here. Why not? Well, as we start to rotate, you'll notice that we start to end up with rotate values. This is not good. We want to keep our joints as clean as they possibly can be in our rotate channels. This is so that if we decide to bake our skeleton down after animation, it's very easy to read animation with our skeleton set to 0 in this initial pose. Now eventually, once we start animating, these values will update, so that's fine, but in the initial pose, we want to make sure all of this is zeroed out and nice and clean. Alright, so in order to do that, we wouldn't want to adjust the joint from our rotate settings here. Instead, we can do so from the attribute editor to get to the joint orient channels. Let's go ahead and take a look. We can access the attribute editor by clicking on the tab here. Or what I'd like to do is go ahead and toggle with Control A. Alright, so let's make sure we're at the attribute editor. Now, we can go ahead and find our joint orient channels just under the joint drop down. Alright, so once we find that, we can start to adjust things in the z-axis. So we can go ahead and kind of switch this value up a bit so that we can slant the joint so it fits nicely inside of this leg. Now, how am I sliding this value? Well, it's just a matter of holding down Control and then dragging with the left mouse button. Alright, beautiful stuff. Now here's the problem. You can see how our chain doesn't quite fit inside of this foot here. So what we'd want to do is translate it down. We can grab our move tool and then we can go ahead and just translate it down a bit so it's right at the ankle. But here's another issue. How are we going to tweak this ankle joint to fit inside of this foot here? Because as of right now we'd have to rotate it, or we can start using our joint orient channels, but that might get a little bit tricky. You can see here that, so we start to adjust, let's say, the Y axis after the X. We'll take a look at how it's slanting up, and it doesn't quite work too well for us. So here's what we'll do. Let's go ahead and undo those moves back to where the X axis was at 180 degrees. What we'll now do is actually get rid of our foot bone. We're going to go ahead and delete that. We'll grab the ankle here and we're going to zero out its orientation. That way it matches its parent. This means that there is no orientational offset from the parent. And what we'll now do is go ahead and move to the next lesson, and we're going to create a brand new chain for our foot, something that's going to be a lot easier to place inside. And you'll notice that that's going to be a bit better of an approach instead of using those joint orient channels. In this lesson, we will finish the left leg's joint chain. So where we stopped in the previous lesson was the ankle. We noticed that the ankle's chain needed a bit of work. It wasn't too easy for us to go in and reorient that chain without some weirdness, adjusting those joint orient values. So we'll go ahead and learn how to get around that in this lesson. The first thing I'd like to do is go ahead and grab the thigh here. And I'd like to go ahead and just kind of slide it over just a bit more so we can make sure that the ankle joint is right where it should control the ankle from. You can see how it's kind of off just slightly. So I might go to more of a side view. We'll press Control A to switch back to our joint orient settings. And again, holding down Control and dragging with our left mouse button, we could start to adjust our joint orient channel. So I'll go to the Y-axis next, just to bring that forward a bit more. Wonderful. Alright, that's good. Let's say we go ahead and create our foot chain now. So again, we'll do that from an orthographic view. We'll go to our side view. I'm now going to grab the joint tool. We will not click on this end joint and create our chain because it's going to get tied to that chain as we start to draw this out. You can see as we start to click, again, that's part of the chain. So instead, let's go ahead and just undo back. We'll go ahead and create a joint away from that chain, and we'll now slide it towards the chain. We'll worry about making sure it's aligned to that end joint later. Now let's go ahead and finish the chain out. We'll create a joint for the ball of the foot and then the toe. Alright, wonderful. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our perspective view. Okay, great. So this is going to be a little bit cleaner for us to tweak. Now you'll see that if we were to try to adjust the joint in, let's say, the Y axis using our joint orient channel here, to kind of start moving that up a bit higher, and then if we were to go to the Z axis and twist that around, you can see again the orientation isn't ideal. Well, what's going on? How come this isn't better to tweak than the last joint? Well, let's go ahead and take a look. I'll go ahead and undo this back. And what we'll now do is actually take our foot bone here. We're going to separate it. We're going to press Shift P to unparent it from this joint. Now, let's go ahead and grab that joint object. It might be easier to do so from the outliner. So I'll go to grab the perspective and outliner view. And here it is, the joint that was once the parent of our ankle chain, joint 4. So what we'll now do is actually just go ahead and zero out its orientation. We're going to set the x to 0, the y to 0, and the z as well to 0. Now this is going to be a lot easier for us to tweak this joint. The reason being is because with everything reset, now as we start to adjust, let's say in the y-axis, which would be the twist, it's basically what direction this projects. So as we start to tweak this in the y-axis, take a look, it's a lot easier to twist this joint around. So I'm going to twist this to about -90 so that the x points down the chain. This is the same joint orient options we're using in our joint settings. Okay, x is pointed down the chain. That's our primary axis. Alright, sweet. So once we've managed to tweak that, I'll go back to joint 4. And we'll want to now make that the parent, but before we do, we should make sure that it's easy to select this joint, because as of right now it's not quite easy to go in and grab that object without accidentally grabbing the original ankle. So if you'd like to tweak that, you can go ahead and press Control A to switch back to your channel box, and now you can adjust your radius on the selected joint. So we can go ahead and highlight the radius channel and use the middle mouse button to increase it by dragging with the middle mouse button a little bit more. You can see that we have now managed to make this much easier to select. We can now go ahead and grab the foot bone here and parent it back to our ankle. So with the foot bone selected, or the child, we would then shift select the object we'd like to be its parent, and then press the P key. Alright, sweet. So now watch this. When we go ahead and grab joint 4 again, the ankle, we can now easily slide this over in our y-axis so that it's aligned to our foot. So watch, when we go ahead and now press Control A, we can go back to our y-axis and we can start to drag that value again. Take a look, now the entire chain is following. Wonderful stuff. Alright, so we've managed to find a much more convenient way to drive this ankle and put it inside of the foot mesh. Wonderful stuff. Now from here, what I'd like to do is go to the end joint, and very important, we'll make sure that its orientation is zeroed out so it matches its parent. Now even though we won't skin to this, it's a good idea to make sure that this is the case, because sometimes we will want to control this end joint, and it's always clean to make sure it matches the orientation as its parent in that case that we will want control over this joint. So it's a good habit to get into so we know how the entire chain flows. Another reason this end joint is here, again, even though we won't skin to it, it shows us the angle that the parent points in. So if we didn't have that end joint, if we were to go ahead and delete it, then we'd be kind of confused as to, alright, how is this actually going to move? Whereas if I were to undo back pressing the Z key, and we were to go ahead and grab that foot bone, now as we start to move that around, we know exactly where that foot bone is pointing. Again, just to show you this, if I were to delete that end joint, grab the foot, and start moving that, again, that joint looks like it's not rotating, but it actually is. It's just that the joint orient channels aren't adjusting. If we were to go in and start adjusting those joint orient channels, then we would start to see that joint actually move. So that's why we want to make sure that end joint is there. Visually, it helps us. Alright, beautiful. So now that we have our ankle here, we'll go ahead and make sure that it is aligned to our original ankle of the legs chain. So we'll go ahead and snap it there, and this is just so that everything is nice and clean. So we're going to grab our move tool. If you need to, click in the center of your move tool to refresh all axes, because you can see we have just one selected, and when we try to snap holding down the V key and the middle mouse button, it might only snap in one axis, the highlighted axis, but if we click in the center of our manipulator, now we can snap in all axes. So again, I'll just hold down the V key now, the middle mouse button, and we'll go ahead and drag, and you can see how it shifted just slightly. So it's now on top of the original ankle. Alright, great. So once we've done that, we can then go ahead and take this chain and parent it to that ankle joint, the original one. So now everything is part of joint 1's chain. Alright, great. So now it's time to basically kind of do some cleanup work here. We will go ahead and rename each of our joints. Let's go ahead and press Control A to switch back to the channel box. I like to rename from here. It's really fast to do that. But thinking about the joints that we will eventually influence our mesh with, the joints that we will skin to our mesh, we can go ahead and think about a naming convention that would be very helpful for us to go in and grab all of those joints. And then for any joints that we will not skin to, like our end joints, again, we can come up with a naming convention that would filter out the selection of any of those. We can just get to the joints that we would like to be a part of this creature's skin. So here's what I like to do. For all the joints that we will, again, skin to, we can use the prefix bind. And then following that, we know that this chain is on the left side of our character. Alright, so we'll add an underscore L for left, and then underscore, and then following that we add the joint's ID. So in this case, it's the thigh. So that's going to be bind L thigh. Now, how many of these joints do we have? How many of these thigh joints specifically? Well, just one. So we'll go ahead and add the number 01 at the end. And the beautiful thing about that is, let's go ahead and hit enter to set this name. If we were to go ahead and duplicate this chain, take a look. We now have A02 as our suffix. So this either means that, hey, we need to rename this joint because it's needed, or this is a duplicate and we don't need it, so we simply trash it by hitting the delete key. Alright, wonderful. So that's the naming convention we'll use. Let's go ahead and copy this name. We'll go to the shin next, paste, and that's going to be bind L shin 01. Let's copy this name. Now, the first ankle joint we created, not the new chain, but if we were to go ahead and press the down arrow to get to the next child, which is joint 3, this is the original ankle. Now, we will not skin to this. Alright, so let's go ahead and paste our name in, and for all end joints that we will not skin to, we'll give them a prefix BE for bone end. Then that will be L ankle 01. Alright, sweet. Now going to the next ankle joint that we will skin to, the one that's parented to the original. Let's go ahead and paste our name in, and that's going to be bind L ankle 01. Just about finished. Let's copy that name. We'll go to our foot bone next, paste, and that's going to be bind L foot 01. And then finally, when we get to the toe, remember it's an end joint. We will not skin to that. That's going to be what? BE L toe 01. Alright, wonderful stuff. Alright, great. So once we're finished with this, we can then go ahead and take our thigh joint, the root of this chain, and we'll go ahead and group it with Control G. When we press the W key, you can see that by default, this group that we created, its pivot is right there at the origin, and this is exactly what we want for things like our global control. This is also that when we start to kind of scale and resize the character, it scales the character from the base, making sure that it scales properly. Alright, so we'll take a look at that as we progress. But as of right now, again, this is a good thing to make sure that your group pivot is right there at the origin. Now, let's go ahead and rename this group. We're going to name it skeleton because this is going to hold all of our joints. So it's going to be skeleton 01. Now, we don't want to necessarily scale this. We're going to scale a global node, but this is going to help make sure that the entire rig scales just fine. So eventually we'll want this skeleton group a part of our global node. But since we know that we will not transform this directly, we can go ahead and highlight all of our transform channels. In the channel box, we can right click, and now we can choose lock and hide selected. It's closer to the end of our contextual menu. Alright, sweet. How do we bring those channels back? Well, simple. We just go to edit in the channel box and choose channel control. We'd search for those. For example, if we were to go ahead and scroll down, it's all in alphabetical order. I'll go ahead and find, let's say, rotation. So we can go ahead and highlight those. There's also scale. We can control click and highlight. And then we can go ahead and move those over. And then we would simply go ahead and highlight those channels again because they're still locked, and then we'd right click and choose unlock selected so that we can start moving those channels again. So that's how we'd go in and bring those back. But I'll go ahead and now close out of this. And I'll also undo to make sure that this group has none of those transform channels. I left visibility because we might want to go in and hide our skeleton at some point. So we can do that easily. Alright, great. Now let's go ahead and take this skeleton group and we'll have it parented to our main character group here. Group Cartoon Beaver. Let's go ahead and press the P key. Wonderful. Alright, so we have finished our leg chain. Let's say we go ahead and move on to the next lesson. We'll learn how to mirror this across, and we'll also create a hip bone. In this lesson, we will add a hip bone, and we'll also learn how to mirror joints. Getting started with the hip bone, let's go ahead and head over to our side view. So we'll grab our joint tool, move back to the side view, and from there, go in and just build out this chain. Now what I like to do to make sure it stays straight, just for clean orientation, so we can actually have it snap to grid first. So I'll go to a grid point here, I'll hold down the X key, and I'll snap twice. So we have one bone object, two joints. Now, let's say we go and take our end joint, we'll press Ctrl A to switch back to our attribute editor. We're just going to make sure its joint orientation is clean. You can see it has 90 degrees in the z-axis, so we'll go ahead and zero that out. Again, so it matches its parent. So you can see X is pointed down, Z forward. If we were to go ahead and grab the parent, that's the case. Alright, wonderful. Now let's go ahead and move this in place. So what I'd like to do is just go ahead and translate that over so it's aligned with the thigh. I'm going to show you how to center it after we have managed to mirror our chain over, but as of right now we'll just go ahead and kind of eye that in place. I'll go ahead and take the end joint here, I'll go ahead and bring that up. Again, so we always know what direction the hip is pointed in. Let's go ahead and move back to our perspective view now. From here, we can grab both joints. We can press Ctrl A to switch back to the channel box. We can grab the radius channel and we can go ahead and start dropping this down a bit, maybe to about a value of 1. You can always put that value in if you'd like. Just go ahead and type in whatever you want. But I'd like to go ahead and drag with the middle mouse button. It's a little bit easier to know exactly what size I like the joints to be. Wonderful. And another thing you can do is head over to Display, Animation, Joint Size, and you can tweak your settings from here. So right now I have it set to about 2, and that's a way of doing that globally. Alright, wonderful. Alright, so now that we have this bone object in place, let's go and grab the root, and we'll name this bind underscore pelvis 01. You can see here that since this joint is centered, there's no need to put an L or R. You could also use mid if you'd like, but I think that would be pointless. So we could just stick with the purpose of the joint, and then the joint ID, and then its iteration, or how many there are. Alright, I'll now go ahead and copy this, head over to the end, paste, and that's going to be BE pelvis 01. Alright, now how do we mirror this across? Well, what we can do is go ahead and take our thigh here, and we would do this one chain at a time, or one joint at a time. That's how the tool works. But with the root selected, we can then head over to Skeleton, Mirror Joint Options, and I'll go ahead and reset the settings. So what's our mirror plane, or the axis we mirror across? Well, if you were to take a look at your axis handle in the scene, clearly that would be the YZ axis. You could imagine, if we were to go ahead and move to more of a side view, imagine a plane that was created between Z and Y. If we were to go back to a front view, that's the plane we would like to mirror across. Alright, so there's that same plane again. We want to mirror across that YZ plane. So let's go ahead and choose Y and Z. Behavior is nice because it's going to make sure that our orientation is flipped so that we get this mirror type of effect when we start to rotate our joints. And a lot of times that's more clear for animators if they have to go in and make corrections after the animation has been baked down. It's a lot easier to read animation that way. And also when you get into more advanced character rigging, it's a lot easier to work with this type of function because, again, you can pose your arms and legs faster in FK mode. And that's a topic that is covered in advanced character rigging. So once you're ready for that, feel free to take a look at that course. So we'll work with behavior. Orientation is going to keep the orientation exactly the same, meaning when we rotate in one direction, that joint is also going to rotate in that same direction. A good example of that would be, let's say, the y-axis. As we rotate in the y-axis, you'll notice that the joint is going to move in that exact same direction. Whereas with behavior, it's going to move in the opposite direction. We get this mirrored effect. Alright, so I'll go ahead and now zero that out. And then what we could also do here, I'll make sure this is set back to behavior. What we could also do is go ahead and actually rename our joints using the last two options here, search for, so we can search for underscore L underscore and replace with underscore R underscore. We wouldn't want to put just an L or an R because if there are more L's and R's in our names, well, they might get renamed too. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll search for underscore L underscore and we want to replace with underscore R underscore. So now, if we were to go ahead and click apply, take a look at what has happened. You can see that our joints have been mirrored across. And watch, when we go ahead and grab both joints and grab our rotate tool with the E key, make sure this is set to local mode just by holding down E and the left mouse button. Take a look, we can find local from here. But now watch, when we start to rotate in the y-axis, we get this mirrored effect. Now to contrast this, let's go ahead and work with orientation. I'll undo back to remove the mirrored chain. Now, with the thigh still selected, we'll use orientation and we'll click apply. Now watch, if we were to go ahead and grab the next joint, grab the thigh on the left side, and we'll go ahead and press the E key again to get back to our rotate tool, you'll notice that they're moving in the same direction. So it really matters with what you want, what type of orientation you'd like, but chances are you'll stick with behavior. Works very nice. Alright, so I'll go ahead and undo that back, and we'll now go ahead and choose behavior. And with the left eye still selected, we'll now click on mirror, so we can close out of our dialog. And there we go. You can also see that this chain has been renamed. So there's the R in our name. If we were to go back to the outliner, you can go ahead and take a look at that chain, which is also underneath our skeleton group. It basically looks at the parent and makes sure that the parent is still the node that controls the joint that we have mirrored across. Alright, so you can see here, if we were to go ahead and expand this chain, that all of those have been renamed. Alright, wonderful. Alright, so from here, how do we get the pelvis to be centered between both thighs? Because this is kind of important. When we start to rotate our center of gravity back and forth, we want to make sure that the knees don't buckle. Otherwise, it might look nasty if you were to try to animate your rig with the center of gravity again rotating back and forth. If the knees kind of shake, you'll have to adjust your knee control to kind of mitigate that shaking. And at best, you might still notice a bit of shakiness in the knees. So we can prevent that from happening by making sure our pelvis is centered. We'll also make sure that our root, or the center of gravity joint, is also centered. But once we take care of the pelvis, it's going to be a lot easier to snap the root to this spot. So how do we center this? Well, we can work with a point constraint to do that. What we do is go in and grab our two thighs, and then we'd grab our pelvis root. And now we can head over to constraint. Point constraint options, we'll make sure maintain offset is off. And now we'll go ahead and click on add, and you can see how the joint here kind of shifted to make sure it was centered between the two joints. Alright, wonderful. So once we finish with that, we can then remove the point constraint as it's no longer needed. Go ahead and delete that. Simply expand the hierarchy, find the point constraint, delete it. And now we can go ahead and take the pelvis and parent that to our skeleton group. Once we've done that, we can now go ahead and take our two thigh chains and parent over to the pelvis. Wonderful, so now they're all connected. Sweet. Alright, our rig is certainly coming together. We'll go ahead and stop the lesson here, and in the next lesson, we'll create joints for the spine, neck, and head. In this lesson, we will add joints that will eventually deform the spine, neck, and head. So in this lesson, I'll show you another very useful rigging tool in Maya that will help us get this done very quickly. Let's say we move back to our side view. We'll grab our joint tool. I'll just go ahead and press the Y key to grab the last tool used. And we'll get started by snapping the grid to keep our chain straight. So we'll go ahead and hold down the S key and snap once, and snap again. Alright, great. From there, we'll go ahead and grab our end joint. We'll press Ctrl A to move back to our attribute editor, and let's go ahead and zero out our joint branch channels. Alright, now from here, let's go ahead and grab the root and move back to our perspective view. With it selected, we'll make sure it's snapped to the character center, which is right where the pelvis pivots from. Alright, so we'll go ahead and grab our move tool, we'll hold down the V key, and we'll middle mouse button drag and snap it over there. Alright, sweet. So now, what we can do here is go ahead and take the end joint and we'll move this all the way up to the top of the head. Alright, where are you going with this? Well, this is how the spine should deform. There's only one bone in the spine, right? No. We're going to now segment this using the insert joint tool. And that will again allow us to not only create the resolution we need, but it'll also keep all of our joint objects straight, and they'll also match the orientation as our parent right now, which is this root. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this works. We'll go ahead and move back to our side view. It's a lot easier to work with the insert joint tool from an orthographic view, but we can work with it in the perspective view. It'll still work the same way. It's just a little bit more difficult to grab the joint we need to segment. But now let's go ahead and head over to skeleton, and we'll grab the insert joint tool found underneath the IK spline handle tool. So once that's selected, we can now go ahead and click on our root. We would click on the parent that we would like to add a joint to, and take a look. Instantly we have a child. Awesome, so let's go ahead and move this up to right around the point where the back should pivot from. I'm looking at this edge loop to determine where the joint should be placed. Great. Now let's go ahead and click on this joint to add a child to it. And this time we'll create a joint where the chest should pivot from. So we're going to bring this up. What about this point here? Wonderful. I'll show you how to change the placement of your joint if you don't quite like where it's at. I'll now go ahead and click on this joint so we can go ahead and add a child here so that we can create our neck's base joint. So there is one joint, but taking a look at how long the neck is, it might make sense to add one more joint, and we should get some very flexible looking deformations by adding another neck joint. So let's go ahead and do that. Just bring this up a little bit more. Great. And now we'll go ahead and create a joint for head deformation. So we'll go ahead and click on this joint, go ahead and bring this up right where the head would pivot from. Sweet. And there we have it. In no time at all, we've managed to create the chain we need for our upper body, for the neck and head. Now, if you ever want to change the placement of any of these without affecting your child joints, so you can see if we just go ahead and translate, the entire chain is going to move. But if we were to hold down the D key, that will send us into pivot mode. And then we can go ahead and grab one of our manipulator handles, start dragging until we've managed to fix the placement. So you can see I'm only dragging in the y-axis to make sure that we don't accidentally move this out of place, like in the z-axis, for example. Alright, so I'm going to undo that back. Alright, sweet. Alright, so there we have it. We've managed to create our upper body's chain. Let's go ahead and take a look at this in the perspective view. Just making sure we like what we have. Everything looks nice. Awesome. So that saved us some time. Let's say we go in and we rename our joints. So being that this joint here is the root, right at the start of this chain, we'll name this bind underscore root 1. I'm now going to copy this, grab the next, paste, and this will be bind back 1. Alrighty. So from there, we'll move up to our chest joint. And taking a look at this, just going to make sure it's at a decent spot for chest deformations. One thing I also like to do is go ahead and take a look at the character and reference mode, and then I like to go to shading, wireframe unshaded, and this allows us to see the topology on top of our shaded model. Also, we can do things like check our joint placement, things like that, just making sure we're satisfied with what we have. I would almost want to kind of bring that joint down a bit more, because I think the chest should pivot from right around this spot here, and right now it's a bit too high. So grabbing that chest joint, I'll grab the move tool, hold down the D key, and just go ahead and drag that joint down just a little bit more. Alright, sweet. So from there we can go ahead and have this renamed to bind chest 1. When we get to the next joint for the neck, this one will be bind underscore neck A 1. Wonderful. So we can now go and copy that, head over to the next joint for the neck, paste, and this will be B. So you can see I'm naming these alphabetically instead of changing the number here. I don't like to change this number because, again, this shows us how unique this joint is. So if we ever need to work with, let's say, a joint that we need to add as an auxiliary pivot point, take this next joint, for example, we can go ahead and name that alphabetically. When we get to the fingers, we'll go ahead and name those alphabetically as well. Alright, so now we get to the head's pivot point, and that's going to be bind head 1. Now how about this joint at the very top? Well, it's really straightforward. That's going to be BE head 1. There we go. Let's go ahead and take a look at our outliner. You can see that this root needs to not only be placed in our skeleton group, let's go ahead and place it there. Go ahead and simply grab the joint, control click the group, press the P key. But we also want to make sure that it's truly the root. What that means is we need to now take our pelvis and parent it to the root. Now instead of pressing the P key, using that hotkey to parent, or instead of going to edit and choosing parent here, we can also middle click and drag to create a parent hierarchy from the outliner. So what I'll do is go ahead and middle click and drag the pelvis, and I'll make sure that this border here, the selection border, wraps around the root, the object we'd like to parent to. Now when we let go, you can see that it's now a parent. So when we grab the root, the entire chain is selected. Awesome. Our rig is really coming together. Fun stuff. So in this lesson, again, we've learned how to segment chains using the insert joint tool, and we also learned another method for parenting objects from the outliner. In this lesson, we will set up eye joints. So instead of, let's say, parenting the eyes to follow our head bone here, what we can do is go ahead and actually create joints and skin the eyes to those joints. If you'd like to understand exactly why we'd want to take that route, feel free to take a look at Volume 5 of our Quick Start to Rigging in Maya. It's basically a way of kind of creating a geocache that we can use to lighten up our file once we're ready to finalize our scene. It's a way of saying, hey, I want to bake all of the animation down to just the mesh and get rid of the rig and everything else while still leaving the animation intact. So again, that's covered in Volume 5 of the Quick Start to Rigging in Maya. Well, let's say we go ahead and jump back into this lesson and create our eye joints. We'll move over to our side view again. We really love that side view. Alright, from there, we'll grab our joint tool. There it is. And we'll now go ahead and snap to grid. So I'll go ahead and hold down the X key and snap to create our bone object. Alright, wonderful. So from here, we can then go ahead and move back to our perspective view. Now we need to make sure that this root is centered with the eye. That way, when we start to rotate the eye, using the joint, we can make sure it will not leave its socket. We want it to remain in its socket. That's pretty funny, actually. Alright, so let's go ahead and make sure that it's centered. How do we do that? Well, instead of using a point constraint, let me show you something else. We could actually work with this object's local rotation axis handle. So with the eye selected and making sure under the show menu we have handles on, we can then head over to display, transform display, local rotation axes, and take a look. This shows us not only the orientation of this object, but we actually have a handle now that we can snap to. So if we were to, let's say, go in and go to show and hide polygonal objects, take a look. That allows us to quickly snap to that handle. Let's go ahead and grab our root bone. We'll grab our move tool. We'll hold down the V key and middle mouse button drag right on top of this handle to snap our joint there. And now we can go ahead and bring back polygons. Wonderful. What I'd also like to do under the shading menu is make sure X-ray joints is on, so we can go ahead and start to work with our joints a little bit easier and see them through our mesh. When that's off, it's a bit more challenging to do that. So make sure X-ray joints is on. I'll go ahead and grab both the roots and its child joint, and we'll go ahead and start dropping their radii a little bit, so it's easier to work with the two joints. I'm now going to grab the end joint and bring that in so it's right outside of the eye. Remember, from here we can go to our attribute editor with Control A, and we can go ahead and zero out our joint orient channels. Wonderful. Beautiful stuff. Alright, well, let's go ahead and press Control A again to switch back over to our channel box view. I'd like to now go ahead and grab the eye geometry, head over to display, transform display, and choose local rotation axes again so we can hide that handle. Great. Now it's just a matter of renaming our joints. So the root joint is going to be named bind Li01. Alright, so from there we can copy that name and rename the end joint. So we should have the hang of this. Instead of bind, that's going to be VELI. Wonderful. Now we can go ahead and take this joint, parent it to the head bone, and then with it still selected, the root, we'll head over to skeleton and grab the mirror joint tool. All of our settings are fine, so all we need to do is go ahead and click on the tool and take a look. It has not only been mirrored, but remember, it considers the parent. Alright, so it mirrors across the parent's plane, and since the parent is in the center, it's going to give us a perfect mirror. If this head bone was slightly offset over to the side, again, it's going to mirror according to the parent, so you'll notice that this joint is not going to move all the way over. Just to show you that, if I were to undo back to remove the mirror joint, if I were to take the head bone and translate that over, watch, when we grab the eye root and we try to mirror, it is going to mirror perfectly, but according to the parent's offset. Alright, so that's just something to keep in mind. So I'll go ahead and undo that, and I'll make sure the head bone is back, and then we'll redo the mirroring tool by just pressing the G key. Alright, wonderful stuff. So there are our eye joints. So once we're finished with that, we can go ahead and take a look at the rest of our skeleton. We're almost finished with it, believe it or not. We'll go in and build our arm joints in the next lesson. Following that, we can go ahead and work on the hands and then mirroring our chain across. And then we'll also want to work on a tail rig. So this is going to be pretty fun, and we're just about done with the skeleton. From there we can get into skinning. And I'll show you some really helpful skinning tools that will help you save a lot of time. In this lesson, we'll create a joint chain for the character's left arm. Now, thinking about the direction the arm has been modeled in, what would be the best view to create its chain in? Well, looking at where the elbow is pointed and how the palm is faced, clearly that would be the front view, so this chain should bend down like so. If the palm was facing towards the floor instead of towards us, and if the elbow was behind the character, then we'd probably want to draw the chain from the top view to create our bend. So in this case, it's going to be the front view. If you'd like to learn more about a chain's preferred angle and how it can be tweaked, how it can be modified, we do have a course on tweaking your preferred angle. You can go ahead and do a search on our site at digitaltutors.com. You'll be given a few lessons that you can take a look at, and again, how you can tweak it to work for your needs. Because sometimes we actually want to go in and tweak our preferred angle because we might not necessarily like what we're getting with inverse kinematics. But again, that can be changed. Alright, let's say we go ahead and head over to our front view. From here, I'll make sure we turn on wireframe unshaded. We already have X-ray joints on, so that's good. And we'll now go ahead and grab the joint tool. Now this can be very tricky, adding a shoulder bone. So we basically need to look at our topology and figure out, alright, how is this arm going to fall to the character's side? Because knowing that will give us an idea of where to place this initial joint. So I'm going to go ahead and add it, taking a look at the edge loop, basically right on top of that edge loop, maybe favoring more of its right side. So I'll go ahead and click to add our joint there, then we'll go ahead and add an elbow joint, and then we'll go ahead and finish at the wrist. In the next lesson, we'll work on creating a hand chain, but right now we're just concerned with the arm. Okay, sweet. So our chain looks great. Let's go ahead and take a look at this in our perspective view. Alright, wonderful stuff. So it fits nicely inside of our geometry. I don't think there's any need to change the position of this root. Now, how about our end joint? Should we zero that out? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at something. You can see that if we were to take a look at our forearm bone here, if you were to look at the y-axis and the z and the x, that looks nice. So you can see how y is pointed up, z is pointed forward, x is down the chain pointing at the child joint. If you were to take a look at the end joint, you can see it has a similar orientation, only it's straightened out. This might actually be ideal for us because it's pointed down the palm. So in this case, we might not want to zero out our orientation here. We might be able to actually use this orientation to build our hand chain much faster, which is super cool. Thank you, Maya. Alright, well, knowing that, we can then go in and start to rename our joints, and then we can make sure that the shoulder gets parented to the chest. So we'll go in and start to rename. It's going to be bind, L, shoulder, so 1. I'll now go ahead and copy that, grab the forearm, paste, and we'll get this renamed. Bind L, forearm 01. Alright, let's go ahead and copy this, and grab the slash joint here, paste, and this one will be BE, L, wrist. So 1. Alright, sweet. So from here, we'll go ahead and take the shoulder, we'll shift select the chest, and press the P key to parent. And there we go. We can mirror now if we want to, but it might make more sense to finish out the hand chain, get that parented, and then mirror across. So that's what we'll do. Let's go ahead and stop the lesson here. In the next lesson, we'll go ahead and finish out a chain for the hand. In this lesson, we will create a joint chain for the character's left hand. As we saw in the previous lesson, the orientation of our wrist was ideal for us to go in and finish out the rest of our hand. We might have to tweak it here and there, but we have a great starting point. Let's go ahead and take this wrist joint and duplicate it. We'll start to drop its radius so we can select this copy. And you can see right now it's parented to the forearm. We actually want it parented to the wrist, but let's go ahead and press Shift P to unparent it for now. Then once we're finished with the hands chain, we'll go ahead and connect everything back to our wrist. Alright, so we'll now rename this to bind L hand 01. Let's now go ahead and duplicate this and move it down the hand. So this will act as our end joint. So we'll want it parented back to our hand. And then we have our bone. We'll now go ahead and rename this to BE L hand 01. Alright, wonderful. So from here we can start to branch out. Let's go ahead and duplicate this joint. I'll press Shift P to unparent it. We're going to go ahead and move this up to the index finger. Now very important, let's go ahead and press the F key so we can frame in on this joint. The index finger is not going to bend from this edge loop here. It's actually going to bend from a pivot before that. If you take a look at your finger and you look at this line that is shown right here on the model, you'll see that line on your hand, but what we want to do is actually have this joint here pivot from the edge before it or around that spot, because that's where the finger is actually going to bend. Alright, so we want to make sure we get the right pivot point. Alright, sweet. So once we've done that, just place this joint a little bit higher up than this edge loop here. I'll start to drop the radius on this just a bit so it fits nicely inside of the hand. Great. We'll now go ahead and duplicate this and we'll move it down our hand. Alright, wonderful. Now we can take this joint and parent it back to the index finger. Wonderful. You might know where we're going with this. After we're done reorienting our root to match the angle of the index finger, we can then use the insert joint tool to segment this. It's a lot easier than going in and clicking to create a segment. So let's go ahead and grab the index finger. We'll press Control A to switch over to our attribute editor, and since the orientation is zeroed out and matches the world, it's going to be really easy to tweak. We just need to go to our z-axis. Again, looking at the direction this cone projects, we need to go ahead and tweak the z-axis to bring the finger up a bit so it flows with the index finger. Alright, that looks good. Let's go ahead and take a look at this from more of a side view. So it looks like we'll need to also tweak this in the y-axis. So let's go ahead and start to drop this over to our right. Alright, sweet. So there we have it. Alright, so once we've managed to create this chain, we can then go ahead and duplicate it and start moving this down. I'll go ahead and grab the Move tool, go ahead and translate this chain down to our middle finger. And again, we're doing the same thing here. We'll first start by zeroing out our orientation. Since the middle finger is pretty straight here, go ahead and start there. We'll take a look at our end joint. Let's go ahead and move this forward. So it's right at the tip of the finger. And now we can press the up arrow on our keyboard to get back to our root. We'll go to our y-axis and we'll start to drag that back. Alright, very nice. Let's now go ahead and duplicate this. And we'll bring this down to the pinky. Alright, so it's the same idea. We will go ahead and drop this in the z-axis. I don't think we need to tweak it in the y-axis. I think that's just fine. But what we will do is go ahead and take our end joint and we'll bring that closer so it's at the tip of this finger. Sweet! So now we can spend time segmenting out these chains. And then we can worry about the thumb afterwards. It's a little bit trickier, but nothing too bad. Alright, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll head over to our front view this time. let's go ahead and find our insert joint tool. Alright, so from there, we'll start to segment out our chains. So starting with the index finger, let's go ahead and drag to create a joint right here on the next section. That would bend. And then we'll click on this joint to create another segment, looking at our edge loop. So you can see, just so I can zoom in to show you this, there are 3 edge loops. When we get to the next section, we want to go right here in the center where this bone should bend. Same thing goes for our end joint. Alright, sweet. Let's go ahead and now take care of the next chain. So we're going to click on the root of the middle finger, and we're doing the same exact thing here. Just adding 2 more joints. Let's do the same thing for the pinky now. There's 1, and there's 2. I really enjoy working with this tool. Awesome. So from here, if we were to go back to our perspective view, you'll notice that all of our joints are nicely in place. How fun. And that did not take much time at all. Right, so from here we can basically go ahead and work on the joints we would use for the thumb. I might just go in and grab, let's say, the end of the hand, grab that joint, duplicate it, press Shift P to unparent it. Now we'll go ahead and kind of move that over to the side. Looking at where your palm's root would bend, we want to make sure our joint is placed at that spot. So I think this is good. I might go ahead and drop the radius on this just slightly. And now we can duplicate this, move it up, right? Wonderful. And now, let's say we reorient this to point down our hand. So what we'll do is go ahead and head over to our attribute editor, and we'll start to tweak the z-axis. Again, so it's pointing right down this finger here, so we can correct the orientation. Alright, wonderful. So that looks good. How about we add a little bit of a twist in the x-axis? Just a bit. Alright, great. So that might be a bit too much. I'll go ahead and pull it back. Awesome, so this looks good. I translate it down a bit, and then we can go ahead and duplicate this and translate it down the y-axis. And right now, if you were to take a look at my move tool, it's set to object mode so that we can move this joint based off of its orientation, the object's orientation. Alright, sweet. We can go ahead and take this end joint and parent it to the joint before. Wonderful. We can now go ahead and take this joint and parent it to the root of our thumb. And all we need is just one more joint here to bend the end of the thumb. So let's go ahead and move back to our front view. We're just about finished. We'll grab our insert joint tool, and we're going to create just one more joint. Alright, sweet. So there we have it. Let's go ahead and move back to our perspective view. So in no time at all, we've managed to create our hand chain. So all of these, let's go ahead and grab each root now, for every finger. All of these can be parented to either the hand bone or to its end joint. I'll go ahead and parent it to the hand bone. But either one would do just fine, because when you rotate the hand, I mean, those joints would still follow. Okay, so it's just a matter of where you'd like them to be parented. Alrighty, well that looks good. I'd also like to point out that if you ever decided on making this end joint of your hand a type of control, well, you might parent all your joints to it so that you can kind of stretch the midsection of the hand, and then the fingers would follow. That's just an idea. But the thumb, you'd probably want to leave that parented to the hand root and not to a joint like this, because you wouldn't want the thumb to stretch like that necessarily. But that's getting to be a more advanced rigging topic. All right, but as you understand what we do here, you'll learn how to work with these tools creatively to create the rig that you need, which is super exciting. Alright, but now it's time to basically go in and rename our joints, and that's going to be it for this lesson. In the next lesson, we'll mirror our chain across, and we'll also create a chain for the tail. And once we're finished with that, we'll be ready to skin our character. So again, I'll go ahead and start the renaming of this, and then I'll leave the others up to you. For the thumb, that's going to be bind L thumb A01. Remember, these will be named alphabetically. So when we get to the end, that's going to be BE L thumb D01. Alright, so you get the idea. The next one will be index, and then mid, and then pinky. Alright, sweet. So let's go and get these renamed, and then we can move on to the next lesson and mirror this chain across, and then work on a tail rig. In this lesson, we will mirror our character's arm chain, and we'll also create a chain for its tail, which is going to finish out our skeleton. Alright, so as you can see, I went ahead and renamed the rest of our joints. So now what we can do is go ahead and take the hand root and parent it to the end of our arm, wrist end. Alright, sweet. Let's go ahead and take our arm chain and mirror that across. So that skeleton, mirror joint. Fantastic. So we just want to now check our orientation on this side, making sure everything's in the right spot. Good stuff. So as we start to grab a few of these and we start to rotate, and let's say a y-axis to create a bend, there you go. So this will look really nice once it's in. We'll make sure to create some neat controls that will allow animators to quickly go in and pose out the hands. Alright, so let's say we now go ahead and focus on the tail. This won't take much time at all. So let's say we move over to our side view, grab our joint tool, and get to it. So from here, I'll go to shading, wireframe on shaded. And we're looking at our edges. So the edges that move vertically, this is where we'll want to create a joint. So let's go ahead and start at the root. Now remember, we could always just go in and first snap to grid. So hold down the X key, snap. And we'll snap again to create our bone object. From there, let's grab our end joint. We'll now press Ctrl A to move over to our attribute editor to zero out its orientation. Sweet, so from here we can go ahead and take our root, and we can go ahead and move that in place. So it's right at the root of our tail. Sweet. And then from there, we can now go ahead and grab the end joint and place that all the way at the very end. Awesome. So now it's just a matter of using the insert joint tool to segment our chain. Let's go ahead and grab it. There it is. So from there, we'll go ahead and create the next joint. Again, looking at our edges that move vertically, this is how we'll know where to place our joints. So it looks like we just have a few more to create. There's one. It looks like there's just one more edge loop, so we'll go ahead and create a joint there. And there we have it. We'll end right here to kind of finish out the chain. Beautiful. Let's go ahead and move back over to our perspective view. We'll go ahead and grab the root and parent it to the pelvis bone. Sweet. So now it's just a matter of renaming each of our bone objects. Let's go ahead and press Ctrl A to switch back to the channel box. And we'll start with the root. It's going to be bind tail A01. And we'll name the others alphabetically. So go ahead and copy. We'll get to the next one, paste, and that will be B01. Alright, so you get the idea. Remember, when we get to the very end, it will have a prefix of BE. And guess what? That's going to finish out our skeleton. Super cool. So now we're ready to skim the character and test our deformations, which is important before we start adding any controls in any other systems, because we want to make sure our joints are in the right spot so we'll get natural looking deformations. And at this stage, if we notice that, hey, the joint's placement is a bit off, it's a lot easier to correct the joint's position now than waiting till later and waiting till after you've created several constraints and other connections. So you get the idea. Alright, so that's going to again finish out our skeleton and also this lesson. So let's move on to the next lesson where we will take a look at some skinning choices we have in Maya. In this lesson, we'll take a look at a few really neat skinning options we have inside of Maya. So the skinning options we'll take a look at in this lesson will help us to get the skinning process done a bit faster while giving us some really great looking results. Let's say we go ahead and get started by working on the easier parts to skin first. These would be the parts that should be skinned directly to just one bone object and nothing more. So we have the nose, the whiskers, the teeth. Let's go ahead and grab those objects. And with all of these selected, we'll now shift select the bone object that should influence them, which is the head bone. Now we can choose Skin, Bind Skin, Smooth Bind Options. I'll go ahead and reset the settings. And what we'll want to do here is switch our Bind To method here from Joint Hierarchy, which considers not only the selected joint, but any children. So this end joint of our head bone would also be considered, and we don't want that. So instead of that, let's go ahead and switch this to selected joints. And now we can go ahead and click Bind Skin, and you'll see that when we now move the head, all of those objects are influenced by just this bone. Alright, sweet. How about the eyes? Well, we already have a bone for each eye, and it shouldn't be influenced by anything else. So again, this is a very fast area to skin. So we're going to grab the geometry, grab the eye bone, bind LI, and now we can go ahead and search for smooth bind. There we go. Let's take care of the next side. We'll just press the G key after selecting the two objects. Alright, so as we start to rotate this around, take a look. Now we're influencing the eye's shape. We're not actually transforming the eye, it's the bone that's transforming. If I were to go ahead and rotate the bone object and grab the geometry, you can see our values here have not updated at all because we're just driving the shape. And Maya makes sure that our channels are locked so that we can prevent double transformations. That's where we add, let's say, a transformation on top of a shape that deforms. So if we were to go ahead and take a quick look, I'll undo back to bring the eye back to its skin pose. If we were to go ahead and take, let's say, our translate channels, right click and choose unlock. Watch this. Now when we go in and grab our eye bone, let's shift select that, grab our move tool, you'll see that the eye is going to push even further because it's already being controlled by this joint, but it's also now being transformed directly. So we want to prevent issues like that. That's why Maya goes in and locks these channels down. So let's go ahead and undo that and make sure those translate channels are locked again. Right, sweet. So that takes care of the eyes, the whiskers, the nose, the teeth. So what's next? Let's go ahead and move on to another area like the hands. Again, something that would be really fast to go in and skin. So we'll grab our hand geometry. Now let's go ahead and shift select all the joints that should influence the hand. So that's the hand bone. We'll also want to go in and grab the thumb root and the last two joints in its hierarchy minus the end joint, of course. So all joints that, again, should influence this hand. We'll now take care of the index finger. So we'll grab its three joints and then the middle finger. And then finally, the pinky. And then from here, what I'd like to do is change up our skinning options to something that we'll actually use for the rest of the body. I'll also show you another method that's the interactive skin bind. We'll take a look at that when we get to the body. But even still, I like to go ahead and work with the options I'll show you now. So I like to leave this at selected joints. Then something else I like to change is the weight distribution. So we can switch this from distance to neighbors. Neighbors, this will help prevent influence in areas that should not receive influence. For example, this end joint of the index finger should not influence the root of our hand, so it makes sure that things like that do not get considered. It makes sure that influence from this joint will not end up all the way at the end of the hand, because we already have a joint here that should handle influence. Alright, so again, I find that to be a really cool solution, very accurate. Another thing we can do is make sure that our drop-off rate is a bit higher. And by doing so, this will cause our influence to fall a bit faster, which is good. Because if we are working on, let's say, the mid-joint of our index finger, it's going to say, alright, I'm going to go ahead and spread out the influence a bit, but I'll make sure it doesn't get too far where it starts to overlap in an area that already has a joint. So instead of 4, we can go ahead and increase this to something a bit more. I might even consider working with the max value of 10. Alright, sweet. So we can go ahead and stick with that. If you decided on adding any extra influences, you can go ahead and turn off maintain max influence, which looks at this number here and it says, alright, according to this value, this is how many influence objects we can have over each point. So each point can be influenced by about 5 joints right now. Here's a number that we can also change. I'll set this to about 3, again, so we can kind of get more blockier results, but by doing so we know exactly where our weighting is going, and it's very fast to edit that weighting to get something more refined if we take this route. So I'll set this to about 3, and then I'll also turn off maintain max influences so we can add more influence. If we do not do this, all joints or all points on our mesh will only be influenced by 3 joints and nothing more. We couldn't add a 4th if we wanted to. Alright, so again, we'll leave that at 3. Everything else looks really good. Let's go to now click on bind skin. Let's go ahead and take a look at our results. So as we grab our joints, as we start to move them around, take a look. Yes, we're getting a little bit of a pull from, let's say, the mid finger as we start to rotate the index, but that's not much at all. This is actually really good, and it won't take much time to clean this up, believe it or not. That's the approach I like to use, to kind of go in and block in my work, kind of like what we see here. And then we can go in and start to refine until we have something that looks nice and polished. So this is great, actually. Let's go ahead and take a look at the thumb. I'm going to rotate the root there. Sweet. So guess what? We don't have much to do to finish up the hand. The hand can get pretty tricky, but again, as long as we consider the settings we've taken a look at, we can get areas like that done much faster. And we'll grab the hand root, start to move that around. Beautiful. Now, let's say if you wanted to add an extra influence after you've already skinned the hand. Would we have to unbind and then smooth bind again? Would we have to go ahead and select our mesh, head over to skin, and choose detach to unbind it? Well, no, not at all. I'll go ahead and undo that back. What we could actually do is add an influence by simply going to skin, edit smooth skin, add influence. So to show you that, we can first go ahead and grab the mesh that we would like to add an influence to, and then we can grab the joint object that we'd like to influence it. So in this case, we should grab the forearm, as that should kind of help lock down the endpoints of the hand right here. Alright, so not only that, I'll go ahead and press the 5 key again, go back to shaded mode. We can now choose skin, edit smooth skin, add influence, go to the option box, and then from there, I'm going to reset the settings. If you're working with geometry, which you most certainly can do, what you can do is go ahead and leave this on, and then you can start to adjust how much influence you should receive over a polygonal mesh or a NURBS object, and then you can adjust your fall off here using the drop-off rate. Or if you're just working with a joint, you can go ahead and uncheck use geometry. What I'd recommend doing is turning on lock weights. What that's going to do is allow us to specify how much the initial weighting should be so it doesn't throw off any of our weighting. And then we can go ahead and unlock that bone so we can paint freely to it. But locking says, all right, I'm not going to add any influence to this joint. But once we unlock it, then we can start adding more influence. Or we can add influence, lock the joint to let Maya know that, hey, I don't want any more influence added to that specific joint. So really cool, but I'm going to go ahead and leave on lock weights for now. And I'll have the weight at 0, meaning that it should not have any influence just yet. We'll add influence when we're ready. So let's go ahead and click on add. Alright, wonderful. So once we do that, let me show you something. If we were to go and grab the hand and head over to Window, General Editors, and grab the component editor right at the top, take a look. We can actually go in and we can head over to our Smooth Skin tab. We can find the bone object that we have locked, and here's where we can unlock it. So there's the forearm. Let's go ahead and set that to 0 or type in off. And there we go. When we want it to lock, we simply go ahead and put in a value of 1 or type in on. There's also a way to do that from the paint weight tool, and we'll take a look at that in the next lesson. But right now we're just binding our character. Alright, so we're just about finished. I'll leave the other hand up to you. And then later we'll take a look at how to mirror our weights across, so we just need to focus on 1/2. Alright, now the feet, same way. We go in, we will grab our 2 bone objects, grab the feet, and we could use those same settings and do a smooth bind. So now when we go ahead and grab the foot bone and start to rotate, take a look. I think the foot is already taken care of. That was very fast. Awesome. Now how about the body? Well, we have a few options we can do. And I'll leave the tail up to you because, again, that's another fast process when we have the idea down by now. But for the body, we actually have a few choices that would be ideal. So if we were to go ahead and grab the mesh and start to grab the joints that should influence it, just go in and grab all of these objects here. The thigh, the shin, the pelvis, the root, okay, the chest, the back, the neck joints, the head. We'd probably also want to go in and add the tail root to make sure that the fur at the back moves a bit. We can go ahead and add the hand root, as that will make sure that the fur at the end of the arm moves. Do the same thing on this side. Go in and grab the arm, the forearm, the hand root. Okay, that looks good. Now from here, we might make sure that we're good to go before we head over to skin, bind skin, and let's go ahead and take a look at the interactive skin bind. So when we go to the option box, you'll see similar settings, but not as much as the smooth skin option box. So again, we can choose joint hierarchy or select the joints. Let's go ahead and choose select the joints. The bind method, closest distance, which looks at the closest distance from each joint to determine how our weight should be distributed. This looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and actually work with these default settings. Let's go ahead and click on bind skin and take a look. We actually have these volume capsules we can now use to set the initial weighting we'd like to have. So this is really neat. Once we exit the volume tool, if we were to press the Q key to go back to our select tool, we could start to kind of move our joint around and figure out how much weighting it has. Awesome. So we can start to now pull at a few joints. You can see how the shin here doesn't have as much influence as it needs. So watch this. We can go ahead and actually go back to that volume tool, select the thigh, and now we can start to adjust our handles here. We can go ahead and grab this green end of the capsule and start pulling that up, and take a look now. The influence is around the thigh and not around the shin. When we see red, that means that these areas are influenced the most. Yellow, it has a lot of weighting but not as much, and then when we see green and blue, that means the influence is starting to drop off. So by the time we get to blue, that means that we hardly have any influence in that area. So if we were to again press the Q key to exit the volume tool and go ahead and grab the shin again, take a look. It looks much better than it did before. How awesome. So that's one route we can take. Another one, if I were to go ahead and just undo back here to remove the skin, is we could actually just go in and use the options that we have worked with initially. So smooth bind options, go ahead and work with these Same settings. Another option you might consider is switching your bind method from closest distance to heat map. Again, this is just another way of saying, hey, this is how I'd like my influence to be redistributed. I want to make sure that this joint will have a lot of influence around surrounding points, but as we get further away, don't want as much influence. And then take a look, we can adjust our heat map fall off from here, increasing that a bit more. And we can choose bind skin. Now with that, we want to make sure that all of those joints are inside of our mesh, because if any are outside of the mesh, it will not consider those joints and it will actually error out on this. So you have to be really careful about that. But take a look, we've done a great job of making sure those joints are inside of the mesh. Now you can see that we're losing a lot of influence in certain areas. So sometimes heat map isn't necessarily the best choice, but sometimes we can get some great results. Look at the thigh here as we start to move that. It's very flesh-like as we start to rotate that. We're getting a little bit of collapsing, but nothing too bad. So that's one route. And then just one more, and this is the one we'll stick with. So let's go ahead and undo back to remove our skin. We'll head over to Skin, Bind Skin, Smooth Bind Options. And let's say we turn off heat map, switch this back to closest distance. Our drop off will set back to 10. Everything else looks good. So now let's go ahead and choose Bind Skin. And let's go ahead and take a look at those areas now. So you can see that this is a little bit blocky. But blocky is good because by having a blocky result, we kind of know where weighting is going and where it's not. And we can be assured that, hey, this is the area we need to actually focus on painting to make sure that we kind of smooth out those blocky results or move those influences to another joint. But take a look at the shin. How great does that look? We may not even have to paint weights on the shin because of those options that we've just chosen. How about the upper body? Again, looking great. A few areas to smooth out. But by, again, looking at those options, I know, hey, the back is being influenced by this amount of weighting, but I know that the root and the pelvis, well, they're untouched, so that's good. I know that there's no weighting around those areas. And if there is, there's very little, so we're good to go. Awesome stuff. Well, that's going to be it for this lesson. So we've managed to bind our character. There's a few other areas that need to be bound, like the right foot, the right hand, and the tail. So I'll leave those up to you. And then you can choose whatever option works best for you. But I'm going to stick with what we have used for the body. And then in the next lesson, I'll show you some weight painting techniques. In this lesson, I'd like to cover some skinning techniques with you that I find works very well and it helps to save us some time. So getting started, if we were to grab the character's thighs, we start to kind of move that around, you can see that we have some areas that collapse in quite a bit, but honestly, we can take care of something like this very, very quickly. So the idea is we'd go in and block in our work, and by doing so, we know exactly where our weighting is going. For example, if we block in 100% weighting on a point, we know that there is no other joint that's going to influence that point because it's already set fully to another influence object. So once we kind of go through and block in our work, not on everything, only on areas that need work, like the side, for example. But once we go ahead and manage to finish that, we can then start to refine our work. And we don't have to work on both halves. We can work on one half and mirror our weights across. The mirror weight tool in Maya is a very reliable one. So let's go ahead and get this started. Now, what we'll do is grab our mesh, head over to Skin, Edit Smooth Skin, and we'll grab the Paint Skin Weights tool. Let's go ahead and head over to our option box. Alright, so here we can see how much influence the selected influence object has. If we were to go to our influence list, we can see what we currently have selected, and this is just a fast way of going through and selecting all of those influences. Take a look, we could also lock those influences from here by clicking on the lock icon, so we can toggle that on or off. It's the same thing we saw from the component editor. Now in this case, I'd like to go ahead and grab the pelvis again, but sometimes it takes a bit of time to find those objects from this list. Yes, we can switch this to by hierarchy or alphabetical order or even flat if we'd like. But another thing I like to do is actually select it from the viewport. How do we do that? Well, let's go ahead and press the 4 key to go to wireframe mode. We can now go ahead and right click on the object that is an influence object and choose select influence. Now we have the pelvis selected. Take a look. Alright, so that's just another way we can go in and grab the influence we need. I'll press the 5 key to go back to shaded mode so we could start to paint our weights in. Let's also go ahead and reset our brush settings. Now go ahead and start to adjust the settings I like to work with to block in weight. And everything else is good except for the brush profile. I like to use a hard brush. The others are a way of just saying, hey, when we start to get outside of our brush influence, you can see the radius of the brush by mousing over your mesh, but as we start to leave that circle, it's going to start spreading out your weight and a smooth fall off. But with this hard brush, well, that's how we could just go ahead and block in weight without having to worry about that fall off. Alright, sweet. So now we can go in and start to paint influence. I'll hold down the B key and drag either to the right with the left mouse button or to the left to either increase or decrease the radius. Alright, let's start to fill in some areas. So we'll just go in and paint, thinking about the points that should be fully controlled by the pelvis, or whatever influence we have selected. Alright, so we'll start to kind of rough those in. I'll start to work my way around the thigh, just going in and blocking in these weights. Alright, sweet. Here's another row we can go ahead and paint. But as we get underneath, we might want to leave a few of these points untouched because we might get some really nice folds. So we can use the weighting that Maya gives us by default as a way to kind of help save a bit of time, because those areas might look really nice, but then there are some other areas that might not look so nice, so we'll just want to fill those in. And again, we don't have to worry about the right half of the mesh necessarily because we can mirror those weights across. I'll show you how to do that. Alright, great. I might go ahead and fill this point in as well. So now, what we can do is go ahead and again go to wireframe mode, right click and choose select influence, and then I'll go ahead and press the 5 key to go back to shaded mode and start to fill in some weighting that should be influenced by the back joint here. Alright, sweet. So watch this. When we go ahead and grab the thigh, take a look. When we start to rotate it, no longer are we getting that harsh result that we saw. There are a few points that need a bit of work, but you can see clearly that, hey, this has done a great job for us. So let's say we go ahead and fill that area in as well. And then what we'll do is go ahead and take a look at the character here in smooth mode, because that's what counts, not this low res state. What counts is how the character will look when we're ready to render, right? So what I'll do is go ahead and press the Y key to grab our brush again. If I were to right click on top of the root, you can see that this is a joint we can paint to as well, but for our back and our pelvis, the majority of these areas should be influenced by those two. And the root is still going to drive everything, so no worries. I might just go ahead and right click and choose the pelvis as the influence we paint. I'll go ahead and fill in those spots that were collapsing due to the thigh having influence in an unwanted spot. Alright, sweet. And I'll go ahead and fill this in. Beautiful. And just a few more points here. Go ahead and add some weight to. Great, so now when we go back to the thighs, we start to rotate that. Take a look, no longer is that area collapsing in. Sweet. Now let's go ahead and do this. We'll press the 3 key after selecting our mesh to take a look at our mesh in smooth preview mode. This does not increase the resolution. This is just a visual aid as to how the mesh will look once we smooth it out. So now watch, as we start to kind of rotate, you can see, hey, this actually looks pretty cool. So this will give us an idea of how the mesh will look when we actually add a smooth node to it. So now if I were to go ahead and select the mesh, press the 1 key to go back to the mesh's true state, this low res, if you're ready to smooth out your mesh, when you're ready to render, you can always head over to your hotbox, holding down the space bar. You can then go to the mesh menu and choose smooth. Alright, sweet. So now when we grab our thigh, as we start to move this around, you can see that that's looking really nice. And if you want to smooth this out even more, you could always just go ahead and select the mesh, head over to the channel box, find your poly smooth face node. That smoothing node, you can find the division channel and increase this. So setting it to 2 will increase the divisions even more. Now why not just go ahead and paint weights to this? Well, you might have an idea as to why we would not want to do that, why we'd want to work with the low res mesh instead, because take a look at all of those points that have been added. Can you imagine if we had to paint weights to all of these points? That's why it's much better to work with a lower res mesh and then increase your resolution once you're finished painting weights. Alright, so I'll go ahead and undo back and remove that smoothing node. Alright, great. So again, that's the process I like to use to paint weights. Now, the great thing is that, again, we can mirror our weights across. So, with the mesh selected, you can head over to Skin, Edit Smooth Skin, and grab the Mirror Weight tool. Let's go to head over to our option box. I'll go ahead and reset the settings. Okay, so at the top we have the mirror plane or the mirror cross axis, which we know to be Y and Z. It's the same option that we have in our joint mirroring options. And then we can choose the direction we'd like to mirror across. So if we wanted to, let's say, mirror from the left half of our mesh to the right half, we'd want to make sure that this option is on because we're mirroring from positive X to negative X. If we were mirroring in reverse order, we'd uncheck this so we can mirror from the right half of the mesh to the left half. Alright, so I'll go ahead and leave that on because I like to focus on the left half, just a preference of mine. And then we have our surface association, which will look at the closest point on the surface to determine what influence it should have. So I found that to be very accurate. Another option I like to change is the influence association. I like to set that to 1 for both passes because this is going to look at the similarities of our hierarchies to determine how our influence should be mirrored. So since we know that the left half has an identical hierarchy to the right half, well then 1 to 1 is going to be a very accurate mirror. Alright, we could also turn on normalize, which will make sure that we keep a range of 0 to 1 or 100% with our weighting. Alright, sweet. So now we can go ahead and choose mirror and watch this. When we grab the right thigh, as we start to rotate that around, we'll notice the same result we saw on the left side. So that saves us a lot of time. Now, how do we refine our weighting? Well, let me go ahead and show you. If we were to go to grab the thigh, we can head over to frame 1 here. We could actually add some animation to check our progress. That'll also help us to get to tighter spots that we'll need to paint. I'll show you how. So on frame 1, with the thigh selected, we'll press Shift E. Now let's say we go to frame 10, and we'll rotate the thigh up. Alright, we want to bring it to somewhat of an extreme because that's what counts. When animators start playing around with your rig, they're going to really try to break the rig, so it's a good idea to really stress test your poses and see how your deformations hold. So we're going to bring the thigh up, and now we can press Shift E after we have finished posing the character, or if you have auto key on, you can go ahead and just pose the character. So I'll actually go to frame 20, drop the leg and actually bring it closer into the body, and take a look, a keyframe has automatically been set. So now, here's what we can do. We can grab the mesh, we can press the Y key, and we can drop our value from 1 or 100% to about 0.05, and instead of using replace that says, hey, I'm going to replace whatever you paint with whatever value we have here, instead of using that, we can use add, which will constantly add weight. So we'll go ahead and leave that at add, and now we can look for any rough areas that we would like to smooth out and refine. So take this area around the left eye. We can go ahead and right click on the left eye and choose select influence. I might drop the radius of the brush by, again, holding down the V key and dragging to our left with the left mouse button. Now we can start to paint weight to kind of smooth that area out. And instantly you can see that this is looking much better already. We're looking at our edge flow to make sure that it looks nice and smooth as we start to take a look at our deformations, they will also look nice and smooth. Alright, great. How about some areas underneath? See, we have some influence here that we can paint, so I'll go ahead and fill in some weighting there, so that is smoothed out much better. Alright, great, so you get the idea. And now what we can do is go ahead and switch back and forth between add and replace. So I'll switch this back to replace, and I'll set the weight back to 100%, and I'll start to fill in 100% weighting on a few rows of points that should be fully controlled by the thigh bone. We'll just start to go in and fill in these spots. Really neat. Alright, just a few more to fill in. And notice I'm not filling in the entire thigh. And here's why. If we were to go ahead and press the Q key to go back to our select tool and grab the shin, so we start to rotate that back and forth, you can see the weighting actually looks really nice on the shin. So what that means is there are some points that we may not want to re-weight because they do a great job already. Now when we get to some harsh areas like this, where it looks like the calf muscle is kind of caving in a bit, here's what we can do. I'll show you another tool I really enjoy working with. It's the weight hammer. So you can see how the back of the thigh looks pretty harsh. But here's what we can do. We can right click and choose vertex mode. We can grab a few points that we would like to smooth out. And then once we have those points selected, just go ahead and grab just a few at the back. We can then head over to skin, edit smooth skin, and use the weight hammer. And it's going to look at surrounding points and average our weighting according to the weighting of those points. So take a look. It's done a pretty good job at blending those weights in. Alright, so now when we start to scrub, you should notice that those points look nice and smooth. Alright, sweet. Now here's another thing we can do. If you notice that the weight hammer has caused those points to collapse in too much, watch this. Go to our paintbrush, and instead of using paint mode, we can use paint select, which looks at the weighting of whatever points we have selected, and it adds that weighting here into the value field. Now here's the nice part. We can now go ahead and right click and select the influence we'd like to add weight to. So in this case the thigh. Now we can start to use the slider here to increase the weighting or decrease it. Great, so I might go ahead and increase that to just a little bit more to bring some volume back so it doesn't collapse in so much. Awesome. So in no time at all we've gotten a great result from the back of the thigh. So now when we grab the shin as we start to rotate, take a look. It looks very nice. And again, when we select our mesh and press the 3 key, again, this is what matters the most. And you can see here that the smooth mesh looked great. Awesome. Alright, so I'll go ahead and zero out the shin again. We'll go ahead and select the mesh and press the 1 key. Awesome, so we've learned how to mirror weights. We've also learned how to smooth out our weighting, and honestly, that's the exact approach that I would take for the rest of this character. And we should not need to spend much time because there are only a few points on this mesh, believe it or not. When we get to like the neck, for example, we can go ahead and right click on our neck joint here and kind of fill in weighting around there. And it looks like Maya's done a great job at that already. I'll go to right click and grab the next influence above. Here we have an area that we can go ahead and paint a full amount of weight in to just block that out. And then either use the weight hammer or use add mode and decrease the value quite a bit to 0.05 to smooth those areas out. So we can switch this back to paint mode. I'll leave the value at 1. I'll leave the operation at place, and we'll just fill this in. Remember, you don't have to worry about the right half because you can go in, select your mesh, choose skin, edit smooth skin, mirror skin weights. Again, the options are just fine. We'll choose mirror. Now watch, when we press the Y key, take a look. That right half has been taken care of. Awesome stuff. Same thing goes for the rest of the body. If there is any asymmetry in your mesh, then those points might not be transferred over too well, but it'll be really fast to fill in those areas using this approach. Beautiful. Now what do we do about a mesh that is separate? How do we mirror weight? Well, simple. If you were to go ahead and head over to skin, edit smooth skin, and mouse over the mirror weight tool, if you look at the command line, or around that area at the bottom of Maya, this actually shows you a tip on how you can use this tool. So what you would do here is you'd select your source mesh and then the destination mesh as it says there. So what does that mean? Well, your source mesh is simply the weighting that you like. And then you can go ahead and shift select the weighting that you don't like, that you like to transfer weighting to. So again, we are transferring from the source mesh to the destination mesh, and now it's just a matter of using your weight tool to mirror those weights across. Alright, sweet stuff. So that's going to be it for this lesson. Now, what I'll do in between lessons is finish out the weighting, and then I'm going to show you a very accurate way of exporting and importing your weight, something I like to use, and that's going to be covered in the next lesson. In this lesson, we will learn how to work with the component editor, as well as how to export skin weights. So here we have the final weighting of our character, and it's just a matter of taking your time until you have the weights you would like to see. So if you need to, feel free to refer to this file if you're having any trouble, but honestly, it's just a matter of being patient, taking your time, and making sure that everything performs well. Now I left one area out just for the purpose of this lesson because the component editor works a little bit differently now in 2014, and I believe this change was made in 2013 as well, but let's go and take a look at how this works. Now first, the area that we're going to tweak is at the top of the character's upper arm, right here around the shoulder. You can see when we start to rotate how we get a bit of volume loss, but we can fix this easily with the component editor. So here's what we'll do. We'll add some animation. We'll go to frame 1. We'll press Shift E. Now let's go to frame 10. I do have auto key on, so when we pose the arm, just lifting it up in the Z axis, that key will automatically be saved. Now let's go to a point around frame 7 or so where we can go in and grab those points quickly. I'll now right click and go to vertex mode, and we'll go ahead and grab these 6 points right here around the shoulder. Okay, from there I'll go to and press the 4 key just to double check and make sure I have all of the points I want. There's one that I need, and I'll deselect the one I don't want by holding down Control and just dragging with the left mouse button. Alright, sweet. So with these selected, we can now head over to Window, General Editors, and grab the Component Editor. Okay, so underneath the Smooth Skin tab, if you've ever worked with the Component Editor in the past, you know that you're able to just go ahead and select the influence from the Influence tab here, and then start dragging the weight slider. But take a look at what that does now. It actually selects the skin object. Alright, so instead, let's go ahead and undo back, press the Z key. What we'd want to do is actually go in and select the columns that we'd like to tweak. So I kind of like how it works now, because now we get to choose the points that we would actually like to reweight, whereas in the past we'd have to reweight all of these points. So if we wanted to only weight 4 of these, we'd go ahead and have 4 selected. But since we want all 6 of these weighted, we'll go ahead and highlight those under the shoulders column. And now, I'll go ahead and adjust the window so you can see this. But as we start to adjust the slider, you can see how our points are starting to change. So we've added more influence now from the shoulder, which is really cool. So if we were to take a look at this, in shaded mode, I'll press the 5 key. We'll also press F8 until we're back in object mode. We could also press the 3 key to take a look at this in smooth preview mode. Alright, so take a look. That looks much better than it did before. We're getting some volume back. Great. So that's how the component editor works now. What I'll do is go ahead and remove the animation by highlighting the shoulder. We can now highlight our rotate channels, right click and choose break connections. Next, let's go ahead and select the character's mesh, and we'll mirror our weight using those same options. Alright, sweet. So now when we grab the right shoulder, as we start to move that around, you should notice that it also deforms like the left arm. Great. So once we're satisfied with these weights, we're ready to export them And exporting is great because sometimes we might have to make tweaks where we actually have to detach the character skin. We have to go to skin and detach skin just to make those modifications. Or perhaps we're creating another type of beaver rig and we want to repurpose what we've done here. So these are some reasons why we want to go ahead and export our weights out so we can quickly import them back in. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this works. Now, what we want to do is make sure that we have all of the joints that are influencing the skin selected so that we can quickly grab them and import our weights seamlessly. Okay, so here's how we could do this. We could actually work with a basic mel script. Yep, we're getting into a little bit of scripting now. Let's head over to our script editor. I'll go ahead and right click and choose clear all. Swipe everything out. We'll make sure we're under our mel tab. If you need to, you can right click and choose new tab and create a mel tab from here. I'll go ahead and work with the one I have. So here's what we need to do. We'll first type in the command select. And now, what do we want to select? Well, we want to select all of the joints of our skin cluster, which is skin cluster 16. So we'd use the list connections command. So since we'd like to work with a command, we would need to add 2 tick marks, which are found above the tab key. So let's go ahead and hit that twice. And then we would put a semicolon. This is the end of our line of code. Now, let's go ahead and type in list connections, lowercase l, capital C for connections, like so. We should see it highlight blue, letting us know that it is valid. Now, next we need to put the flag -type because we're trying to tell Maya that we'd like to list a specific type of connections. Well, what type? Well, that would be join objects. Alright, so here's what we do. After type, we put quotation marks, and inside, we'll type in joint. And then from there, outside of our quotation marks, we now need to specify where we'd like to grab those joints from. Well, all joints connected to skin cluster 16. Let's go ahead and copy that name from the channel box. Press Control C. And now we'll go ahead and paste that inside of our script editor. So watch this. When we go ahead and highlight our code and hit enter, you can see that Maya has actually gone in and selected all of those joints that influence this character's skin. Great. So here's what we'll do now. We'll go to create and we will make a quick selection set. We'll go to sets, quick select sets. Let's go ahead and abbreviate this. That's going to be SKN. So we know that this is a part of the creature's skin. And we'll choose add to shelf. Alright, wonderful. So whenever we need to get those joints again, we simply click on this icon here. So now let's say we go ahead and use another script to export our weights out. Something that works in a very solid way. What we'll do is go ahead and just highlight what we have here and just press the delete key. Alright, wonderful. Alright, so now we'll go ahead and type in deformer and then capital W for weights. Again, we should see it highlight blue, letting us know it's valid. By the way, if you want to, you can hold down Control and scroll forward with your middle mouse button to zoom into your text field. So I'll go ahead and do that so you can see exactly what I'm typing here. Now what we need to do is specify the path we'd like to export our weights out to. So that's going to be the flag -P, and then inside we'll go ahead and put quotation marks because we're trying to tell Maya a specific path. If I were to bring over my folder here, this is the data folder of our project. So let's go ahead and select inside of our address bar. We'll go ahead and choose Control C to copy this. And now, let's say we go ahead and paste that inside of our quotation marks. Alright, sweet. Now here's something we have to change. See all of these backslashes? Well, for Maya recognizes forward slashes. So all you need to do is change your backslashes to forward slashes so Maya knows your path. Alright, sweet. We're just about finished. Now what we need to do is tell Maya that we would like to export. So that's going to be -export. And then next, we need to tell Maya what deformer we're trying to grab information from. So it's going to be -deformer. And then we'll put quotation marks after that. And what's the deformer? Well, we know it's skin cluster 16. So let's go ahead and find that. We'll select the body. We'll go ahead and double click so we can copy that name. and then we'll paste that inside of our quotation marks. Alright, one more thing. All we now need to do is go ahead and tell Maya the name we would like this file to be. So let's go ahead and put quotation marks again because it's a specific name. I'll also put a semicolon at the end. This is how we end our line of code, so Maya knows that, hey, this is the end of this code. So now, inside of our quotation marks, we can come up with any name we'd like. Let's call this skin weights underscore body underscore beaver, just to be descriptive. So if you were saving out your hand weights, it can read something like skin weights underscore r underscore hand beaver. Alright, beautiful. Now, we'll tell Maya that we would like this to be saved out as an XML cache file. What's beautiful about those files is you can actually go ahead and open them in your text editor and tweak the data inside, but we won't need to do that here in our case. We just want to save those weights out. So I'm going to go ahead and put .xml. This is the file type. Alright, we're good to go now. So when we go ahead and highlight everything and hit enter on our number pad, notice our weights have been exported out, and take a look at our folder now. There's our file. Alright, sweet. So if we wanted to import them back in, it's actually very simple to do. Let's go ahead and do that to finish up this lesson. With the mesh selected, what I'll do is go ahead and head over to skin, and I'll choose detach skin. Alright, sweet. So from here, let's say we grab all of our skin joints. We'll now go ahead and shift select our character. We'll choose skin, blind skin, smooth blind. Wonderful. Now let's go ahead and import in those weights. So with the mesh selected, I'll head back over to the script editor, and all we need to do is go ahead and change a little bit of information here. So the deformer now has changed. It's skin cluster 20. That's what we'd like to import to, instead of skin cluster 16. So let's change that 16 to a 20. We know that we're not exporting, we're importing. So we'll just go ahead and change export to import. Wonderful. And this is the file that we'd like to import. It's as simple as that. So when we highlight everything and hit enter on our number pad, let's take a look. Take a look. We have a seamless transfer. So when we go ahead and close this out, so we start to move our arm around, everything's looking great. Go ahead and take a look at the right side. Beautiful stuff. What happens when we go ahead and move the arm up? Exactly what we had before. How cool is that? So it's worked great. So remember, when you're doing this, make sure you grab all of your skin joints so that Maya knows exactly what you'd like to transfer back to. If anything is off, this might not work properly. And then you saw how easy it was to change your export command to an import command so we can get this working just fine.